Tonight, if your heart breaks, you likely retreat into a room and a screen. But for 99.9% of human history, that was an impossibility. For over 300,000 years, your ancestors lived in a world without doors, without privacy, and without the option to be alone. When a bond shattered in the Paleolithic, it wasn't a private tragedy. It was a survival crisis. They didn't have therapy. They didn't have self-help. They had the tribe, the fire, and a biological drive that refused to let them fail. So what did they actually do when love ended? The answer reveals the raw, unfiltered architecture of the human heart. To understand the ancient breakup, we have to understand the stakes. In the ancient world, heartbreak wasn't just an emotion. It was a biological emergency. Imagine a Homo sapiens on the African savanna 100,000 years ago. In this environment, the individual is nothing. The group is everything. Losing a partner wasn't just about losing romance. It meant the total collapse of a survival equation. A partner was a co-hunter, a co-gatherer, a second set of eyes to scan the horizon for leopards, and a source of heat during a freezing mountain night. When that bond snapped, the brain triggered a response that was designed to save a life. Neuroscience tells us that social rejection activates the anterior cingulate cortex. This is the exact same region that processes physical pain. For the ancient human, the ache in the chest was a literal signal. Your body wasn't just sad, it was reacting as if it had been stabbed. Why? Because in the Paleolithic era, being alone meant becoming prey. The pain of a breakup was an evolutionary alarm bell. It was the DNA screaming, "Danger, you are isolated, you are vulnerable." The desperation we feel today, the obsessive need to reconnect, the crushing anxiety. For the ancient human, this was a tool. It was a biological drive that forced the heartbroken individual to move, to seek safety, and to cling to the group before the wilderness claimed them. But while the pain was extreme, the way it was handled was fundamentally different. There was no such thing as private grief. Ancient humans lived in hyper-connected bands of 20 to 50 people. In these groups, the individual was never the unit of survival. The tribe was. When anthropologists study modern remnants of this lifestyle, like the Hadza of Tanzania, they find something striking. Relationship transitions are fluid. There is no concept of ghosting, no cutting contact, no blocking. Why? Because you couldn't stop seeing your ex. When your ex was the person helping you butcher the antelope, you couldn't take space. When you all shared the same shelter to survive the rain, when a couple separated, the entire tribe absorbed the shock. The grief was not an isolated burden. It was a communal responsibility. If a grieving member became too distracted to forage, the other stepped in. If the loss of a partner meant a gap in protection, the tribe redistributed the watch. The community ensured that the broken-hearted individual did not starve and did not wander off into the jaws of a predator. They practiced what scientists call co-regulation. By remaining in constant physical proximity, by sharing the same food, and hearing the same laughter, the ancient human's nervous system was calmed. The tribe signaled to the brain, one bond is broken, but the primary bond, the bond to the group, is still intact. The alarm bell stopped screaming, not because the love returned, but because the safety returned. The daytime was for the grind of survival, but the night was for communal repair. Ancient humans didn't retreat into the dark to cry. They retreated into the circle of fire. The fire was the original sanctuary. Around it, the raw pain of a breakup was transformed into something manageable. A story. Ancient humans didn't talk through their feelings in a clinical way. They used myths. The elders would tell stories of the great spirits, of ancestors who lost everything only to find a new path, of the moon that vanishes for a time before returning stronger. By framing a personal breakup within a collective myth, the pain was given meaning. It was no longer a failure of the individual, it was a part of the natural cycle of life and death. They performed rituals of separation. These weren't just symbolic, they were psychological tools. Dances, chants, shared meals, movements that signaled to the brain that a chapter had closed and a new one had begun. They lived in a web of connection so complete that a single broken heart was held by 50 other hands. They didn't try to get over it by ignoring the pain. They shared the grief, processed it aloud, and carried it together until the weight became light enough to bear. There is a deeper biological layer to this healing, something tied to the very rhythm of their existence. As we have explored, ancient humans did not sleep in one continuous block. They had the first sleep and the second sleep. And in that gap, the quiet, meditative hours between midnight and dawn. That is where the real emotional processing occurred. Imagine the scene. The fire has died down to glowing embers. The tribe is hushed, the air is cool, and the sky is an ocean of stars. In this window of wakefulness, the ancient human entered a distinct state of consciousness. Away from the noise of the day's survival, they lay in the dark and they thought. They processed the loss. They felt the raw anger, the void, the longing, but they did it in a state of profound silence. Unlike the modern mind, which is bombarded by noise and blue light, the ancient brain was in sync with the earth. The midnight wakefulness wasn't insomnia. It was a dedicated window for the brain to integrate trauma. They watched the stars move. They listened to the wind in the acacia trees. And they accepted the impermanence of things. To the ancient human, loss was a constant. They saw animals die. They saw seasons vanish. They saw elders pass away. A breakup wasn't a shock to their system. It was a reflection of the world around them. By the time the sun rose, the grief hadn't disappeared. But it had been categorized. It had been placed into the larger context of existence. They woke up, they stood up, and they stepped back into the tribe. The experience of the ancient human tells us something fundamental about our species. We were never designed to handle loss in isolation. The biological machinery of heartbreak, the anterior cingulate cortex, the dopaminergic withdrawal, the midnight insomnia. All of these were designed to drive the individual back to the group. The pain was the compass, the longing was the fuel, the tribe was the destination. For 300,000 years, the cure for a broken heart was not self-improvement or finding yourself. It was the opposite. It was losing yourself in the collective. It was the physical warmth of another human body. It was the sound of a shared story around a fire. It was the knowledge that your value was not tied to your relationship status, but to your place in the band. They didn't move on from their pain, they were carried through it. They didn't heal by closing doors, because there were no doors to close. They healed by staying open, by staying connected, and by refusing to let the darkness of loss outweigh the light of the communal fire. We still carry the same brains as those ancient humans. We still feel the same sting of rejection. We still wake up at 3 a.m. with a racing heart. But we have traded the circle of fire for the glow of a screen. We have traded the tribe for the luxury of a locked door. And in doing so, we have accidentally disabled the very system that was designed to save us. Ancient humans survived the breakup because they never had to survive it alone. They didn't fight the biological alarm bell. They followed it right back to the people who loved them. That has always been the only way that make it through the night.